As she walked gracefully into the living room, I couldn't help but notice her outfit. She wore the classic little black dress, paired with bright red heels that added an elegant edge. Not a single strap or line was visible, no sign that she'd taken even the smallest precaution to protect her modesty. Ah, if only this display were meant for my eyes alone. I took another sip of my old-fashioned, my third of the evening, seeking the liquid courage that many men in my position often crave. I could tell tonight was going to be significant. My wife, Claire, against all odds, was about to push me into a situation that went against everything I valued. After 10 years of being together, including 7 years of marriage, I knew her patterns well. She had a way of setting the stage before delivering what she believed to be earth-shattering news. "Jimmy, we need to talk," she began, using the nickname I despised since middle school. "My name is James, not Jimmy, not Jim, not Jamie." I hated that nickname for years, as it brought back memories of being a scrawny boy bullied mercilessly until a growth spurt changed my fortunes in high school. Claire, being a psychologist, knew exactly how to twist that particular knife. It was a manipulative way to throw me off balance. "Easy, Claire. Can't this wait until morning?" I replied, feigning calm. I saw the flicker of frustration in her eyes. I had derailed her carefully planned script. Perhaps she expected me to react differently, maybe with a trembling, "Where do you think you're going dressed like that?" or tears streaming into my drink. But I stayed quiet, determined to let her reveal her intentions. "Don't you want to know where I'm going and who I'm going with, James?" she pressed. Her tone had shifted, and she was already addressing me by my proper name, an unplanned concession. "Claire," I said flatly, "I already know the answers to those questions. Asking you would be a waste of breath. And frankly, I don't care anymore." Her gasp was sharp, and for a moment, she looked as though she might crumple under the weight of my words. But Claire was nothing if not resilient. She recovered in seconds, though I suspect that moment felt like an eternity for her. "Well, James," she sneered, reverting to a mocking tone, "what do you think you know?" There it was, the arrogance and contempt I'd come to recognize. "If you must know," I said evenly, "the who is Dan Jenkins. The guy you met at that club a few months back, the one with no jacket required. You danced with him all night, ignoring my protests. The same man I warned you about when we argued over your behavior. The man I specifically said not to let steal your heart." Her face turned pale, her confidence cracking under the weight of my words. "As for the where," I continued, "I assume you're planning to spend the night with him, getting to know him in the biblical sense. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me." She rallied quickly. "Nosy Parker, aren't you feeling superior right now?" Claire snapped, her tone dripping with venom. "Yes, I'll be meeting Dan tonight. And yes, we'll be enjoying each other's company. I'm done hiding it. You'll just have to deal with it." Her confidence was palpable, but I could see her calculating the next move. "Or," she added with a smirk, "you could go ahead and try to nip this in the bud, like Don Knotts used to say. But let's not pretend you'll do anything about it. What will you do? Destroy me in the divorce? Take half of my money, the money you contributed absolutely nothing to? Half of my company, which I built with nothing but my own hard work. Leave me homeless in an alley while I still pay you alimony, as you ride off into the sunset with Dan?" I took another sip of my drink and finished her sentence for her. "Exactly. That's what you think will happen, right? I'll be left penniless, humiliated, and broken." "Precisely. You pathetic little man," she replied, her voice cutting like glass. "I've spent years wondering what I even married you for. Honestly, the only thing you've ever offered me is a life of luxury. Other than your money, James, you're completely average. Mediocre in every way." I smirked at her. "I might be mediocre, Claire, but I only ever made one truly bad decision, letting you get a hold of my heart. Sure, I'm no dancer, but in life, I usually skip right over gold and strike platinum. Except when it comes to you." Her sneer deepened as she adjusted her shawl and turned toward the door. I cleared my throat. Claire, we're not done here. You can't hurry love, after all. So a few more moments won't ruin your grand escape to Dan's arms. Visibly annoyed, she spun around. There's nothing left to say, James. I've got you by the roots and stem. Either learn to live with it, or end up a pauper. I fought against the surge of anger threatening to take over. The thought of resolving the situation in a more permanent way flickered briefly in my mind before I pushed it aside. After 10 years of this, the least she could do was hear me out. Fine, she said dismissively. If it makes you feel better, go ahead and rant. It won't change a thing, but I'll indulge your bruised little ego. I sighed, trying to stay calm. I just want to tell you a story. I began. You see, your first night out with Dan was a wake-up call for me. I realized then that the person I thought I knew was gone. Within a week, I confirmed it. Your actions left no doubt in my mind, and I decided then and there that you were dead to me. If you were drowning, Claire, I wouldn't even lend a hand. She laughed mockingly. Wow, James. Either you're even more of a spineless wimp than I thought, or you've been secretly enjoying the drama of my affair. I shook my head. There's a third option, genius. I decided that if I couldn't escape this mess cleanly, I'd at least make sure I wasn't the only one paying the price. I came up with a plan, not a 5-year one, like the old USSR, but a tight 5-month strategy. She folded her arms, intrigued despite herself. Fact 1, I continued. The divorce courts favor women, or worse, bleed both parties dry. I had to ask myself, do I let someone who plans to destroy me win? The answer was no. Fact 2, I learned that if I burned through our assets before the divorce, the only things I'd be held accountable for were my salary and my retirement. Both could be managed strategically. I took another measured sip of my drink, maintaining my composure. Remember when I convinced you we could save a fortune in taxes by letting my business hold the leases for the house and cars? She blinked, her expression briefly shifting to confusion before she caught on. That was phase 1, I explained. Now, the company owns everything. And guess what? I own the company, which means I own you, she interrupted with a sneer, attempting to reclaim control of the conversation. Not quite, I replied calmly. Phase 2 was selling the company. Her face froze, then twisted in rage. You bastard! How dare you do that? Not that it matters. You still owe me half the sale price and your retirement. I continued calmly, though my voice carried a weight that even I could feel. So far I've been civil, Claire. Don't interrupt me again, or you'll never see Dan. I've been unwilling to resort to violence against you, but Dan is a different story. The anger I've been trying to suppress must have shown on my face. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, I saw genuine fear. My voice and expression had clearly given her pause. Now that I have your attention, I said, regaining my composure, allow me to continue. I took a deep breath and let my tone soften slightly. Picture something simple. Clouds, little ducks, maybe a pink golf ball. I paused, letting the absurdity of the imagery settle in. That's just how my mind has been working, scattered, but focused on the task at hand. And here's the truth. You're not entirely wrong. Our broken system, this machine we call justice, has overstepped its original purpose. It no longer simply protects or ensures fairness. It pokes its fingers into every part of our lives. And in doing so, it decides what's moral for us, ignoring personal choices and values. But I wasn't about to let it dictate my life. She opened her mouth to interrupt, but I raised my hand. Claire, I've done my homework. While you've been playing both sides, I've been planning. I realized that if I could let go of my wealth, truly stop caring about it, it would all fall apart before we filed for divorce. And if that happened, it wouldn't be subject to asset division. Sure, I'd be broke. But you'd get nothing. Her eyes narrowed, but I saw her falter for a second. You lose, Claire. Memo bis punita delicatum. No one gets a second punishment for the same offense. In this case, there's nothing left to take. She raised her hand in disbelief, as if we'd reverted to grade school theatrics. I motioned for her to speak. But you still have your salary and retirement, she said, her voice shaking. Unless you've done something drastic. Exactly. Phase 3, I replied. After selling the company, I agreed to stay on as an employee. My new monthly salary? A whopping $1. Her legs wobbled, and she practically collapsed onto the couch. And my retirement, I continued, savoring the moment. I cashed it out, took the penalty. Then I visited some old friends in Vegas, where I managed to lose every last cent, and more. Now I owe those friends a tidy sum. She looked at me with shock. You're lying. You don't have those kinds of friends. Are you saying you're in debt to the mob? I chuckled, unable to hide my amusement. Well, not exactly the mob. Let's just say Sal. A man I once considered like a brother has certain expectations. One day, he may call on me for a favor, or he might break my legs. Who knows? Either way, Sal has his reputation to maintain. Sal, she asked incredulously, as in salmonella. I smiled. Yes, Claire, that was an interruption, but I'll let it slide this time. As much as Sal enjoys a good laugh, I think he'll handle things professionally. And no, I didn't tell him about Dan, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about it. Let's just say I showed mercy, a very small amount. Don't test my patience any further. She nodded numbly, her bravado fading. So, I continued, as we speak, we are deep in debt. To Sal, to the banks, to the credit cards. And now, you carry an even larger burden than me. I couldn't let you know the extent of our financial ruin until the timing was right. Her voice cracked. Is that it? Have you ruined everything just to spite me? I shrugged. Almost. I finished the final steps a few days ago. Oh, and I removed the keylogger I'd placed on your devices. It warned me about your plans for tonight. By the way, you might be wondering why Dan hasn't called while you were getting ready. I disabled your phone. Couldn't risk you recording this conversation. Could I? Her face twisted with disbelief. You're insane. Maybe, I admitted, but I couldn't afford to let this confrontation spiral out of control before I was ready. And honestly, you didn't even notice, did you? Your mind was too occupied with thoughts of your little rendezvous. She stared at me, trembling, but said nothing. I sighed. I'll get the divorce paperwork served soon. In the meantime, I've already made arrangements for my living situation. You can stay here until the company's new owners send you the eviction notice. Her voice cracked. What do I do now? I took the last sip of my drink and set the glass down. We'll live separate lives, Claire. You'll figure it out. You always do. I'd say, don't lose my number, but honestly, Livy. Yes, James, she interrupted, her voice subdued. There it is, I said with a wry smile, my proper name. For the last time, it'll matter. But as far as I'm concerned, lose my number. The divorce proceedings weren't entirely smooth. Her lawyer, paid for by Dan, of course, tried to argue for maintenance. They cited potential future earnings and even attempted to claim punitive damages for what they called my fiscal maneuvering, but the judge wasn't having it. He refused to enforce something so intangible. The best they could get was a clause allowing them to revisit the claim if I secured gainful employment within the year. Fat chance of that. Thanks to Salmon Inca LLC, a convenient front created by S, I found myself recovering at a private villa in Palma. Officially, it was a therapeutic retreat for my supposed gambling addiction and the PTSD caused by Livy's mental cruelty. Unofficially, it was paradise. Beautiful surroundings, attentive nurses and therapists, and absolutely no need to think about Livy or Dan. The facility's official owner, a friend of ours. Patient count? One, I dreamed of saying, a friend of mine owns this place, ever since ninth grade, when a fellow outcast and I finally stood up to the school's worst bully. Sure, we both got our clocks cleaned, but in our shared agony, a bond was formed. A bond that's lasted to this day. Side note, if you ever find yourself fighting a Sicilian-only son, tread carefully. You never know who they know, or what doors that connection might open later in life. Thanks to S, who stepped in as my unlikely savior, I walked away from the divorce with nearly 90% of my assets intact. Not bad for a plan hatched out of desperation. Of course, I gifted S a share of the proceeds. Even when you're as close as brothers, you let your buddy wet his beak. Always wanted to say that. As for the rest of the money, some of it went to another one of Sal's friends, a professional, shall we say. Dan needed to be taught a lesson, and while I didn't request anything permanent, I made it clear that his actions wouldn't go unpunished. Tonight, he'll learn exactly what it means to cross a line with a married woman. I don't want him dead, just re-educated, enough to ensure he'll always remember this mistake and regret it. As for Livy, she'll realize she threw everything away. But by then, I'll be too far gone, living a new life far from her reach. And with that, today's story comes to an end.